So my story begins in Eastern Europe in the mid-'80s. I'm originally from a country called Romania, from a small town called Constanța. And I grew up in a fairly rural area. We had a plot of land, and we grew the food that we ate. And there was really, yes, that's me. We grew the food that we ate, and whatever was extra, we'd can or store for the winter in our cellar. And every food scrap that we would produce would end up in a compost, so our garden was fertilized year after year and very productive. And I was a fairly active child, so my parents had to think outside of the box and sometimes quite literally inside of the basket to keep me contained. And so they realized early on that they needed to give me something to do, so they taught me how to read. And man, did I like to read. So I devoured every single book that was put in front of me, and I became really fascinated by anything that involved magic, superpowers, and I was at the age where I would start thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I looked around, and I realized that there really wasn't much magic to be had in real life. So I needed to be a little bit more pragmatic. And I thought about it long and hard. And I was acutely aware the issue of garbage because it smelled bad. And so I realized that the garbage men that would take our trash away were real-life heroes because they would take the smelly stuff and put it elsewhere, and they would save us from the fruit flies. I hate fruit flies. So I decided to tell my parents that I wanted to be a garbage man when I grew up. And I remember my mother turned around and said, no. Okay? So after some negotiations, I was allowed to consider becoming a superhero, and I would choose two powers. My first power was to make the waste go away, and my second power was to be able to use electricity, because I just thought that was really cool. And so 30 years later, I am a professor at University of Colorado Boulder in the Department of Chemistry. I am a fellow in the Renewable and Sustainable Energy Institute, and I'm also a professor in material science and engineering. And I lead an amazing research team that specializes in inventing new chemical reactions that use electricity to take things that would be normally considered as wastes into things that are useful. And so while we might not get to wear capes every day, we do look really great in a lab coat. So, in all seriousness though, what motivates us is an impending crisis related to our continued dependence on fossil fuels. We use fossil fuels to fuel our cars, to heat our homes, and to produce the materials that our modern lives depend on. And when access to these fossil fuels is compromised, things like this start happening. And you might say, well, but Professor Luca, recycling, it's always good, right? The reality is that with declining access to fossil fuels, things like quaternary recycling, which is the recovery of energy from burning trash, is picking up more and more traction. To make things worse, over the past 50 years, our global population has actually doubled. So we are now pushing about 8 billion people on the planet, and with more people on the planet, we're going to need to feed them. We're going to need to grow more crops. We're going to need to be producing more and more fertilizer. And some of you might not know that 3% of all of the world's energy production actually goes into the production of fertilizer. So we have a problem, okay? With more and more fossil fuels, we end up dumping more and more carbon in the atmosphere. And what this carbon does is it heats up the globe. And when the globe starts heating up, we have climate disruptions, we have environmental issues. And so what my team and I do is we want to meet this head on. We want to invent new ways to do our chemical business that avert the use of fossil fuels. So at the heart of everything that we do is this idea that we can produce green electricity from the sun, and rather than use fossil fuels as our source of energy, just use electricity that is produced from sunlight. And let me tell you what we can do. We can use electricity to capture and store carbon dioxide. We can use electricity, air, and water to take carbon dioxide and convert it back into fuels and building materials. What we're doing, in effect, is quite literally running combustion in reverse. We can also take nitrogen, a main component of air, electricity, and water, and produce fertilizer. We can also take the same kind of electricity and break down the molecular bonds in polymer wastes. In that process, we just recover the molecule that the polymer wastes are made of, and we can then just reuse them rather than put them back into the landfill. And so our vision is to ultimately end up in a world where an electrochemical device could be attached to your car. This electrochemical device would capture the carbon emissions that would come out of your tailpipe, store it, and then ultimately regenerate the fuel that you started with. We also see a world in which you could have a solar panel attached to an electrochemical device in your backyard, and you could produce as much fertilizer as needed on the spot. We also see a world in which you can put your plastic waste into a disposal bin that would just decompose it back into its molecular components. So rather than putting it back in the landfill, you could just reuse it right on the spot. And so that is our medium-term vision, and it is my firm belief that one of the huge societal challenges for the far future is the issue of food. Within our lifetimes, I believe that we will have the chemistry to take electricity, air, and water and produce food in the form of sugars. And that will solve a lot of issues within our terrestrial issues right now, but it will also enable us to do something that we haven't seen before. I think that with this kind of chemistry, we will be able to sustain long-term human exploration on faraway planets, such as Mars. The limitation of human exploration in the long term is actually being able to feed the people that you're sending up there. And so, is the sky the limit? Who knows? But I really do think that while certain things that may have been considered science fiction hundreds of years ago, we get to experience them today as our reality. And so who knows whether this could be our future. Coming back to Earth, little Oana wanted to be a garbage man, and she was told that she couldn't do it. And so what my team and I do is we take the trash and we make it go away, and we do this using lightning in a bottle, quite literally. And while this talk may have had a lot of trash and waste in it, I think my parents would be okay with it.